Hey, welcome to the Healing She Got Faith show. I am Lily. I am the founder of Healing She Got Faith, and I am the host of the Healing She Got Faith talk show. Healing She Got Faith is an organization that was created for adults who are dealing with grief and or on their self-love journey. During this talk show, we talk about grief, healing, self-love, but overall, we are encouraging you to love you the way you love the world, okay? So we thank you all for tuning in. Hey, welcome to the Healing She Got Faith talk show. This is Lily. I am your founder. I am the host, and I would like to welcome you to episode 127. If you are a long-time listener, welcome back. If you are new here, welcome. We are currently in our grief, healing, and holiday series. Today's topic is National Children's Grief Awareness. I want to say day, but it's not day. It's just National Children's Grief Awareness. This is a topic that I have been embracing for a couple years now. And for like the last 2 or 3 years, I've actually dedicated an episode just to National Children's Grief Awareness Day, talking about statistics, resources, and just different things of that nature. Here we like to bring awareness and educate. We are all about grief. And we are currently in our grief, healing, and holiday season. So that's what this series is called. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the episode. And I'll see you guys over in episode 127's Icebreaker. Welcome to the Icebreaker segment of the Healing She Got Faith talk show. Here we pull affirmation cards from different affirmation decks. We read them and we say if they resonate with us, why or why not. This is our one and only icebreaker. We do it at conferences, professional developments. We do it on the podcast, obviously. And really it's just to get us to start talking about ourselves and to get comfortable. We are here to promote having a safe space. And so while you're here with Healing She Got Faith, we want you to feel safe enough to speak about where it is that you are in life. We are your safe space. All right, welcome to episode 127's Icebreaker. So I don't think I've been saying the name of these cards in the last couple of episodes, but I got these new cards. They're called the Comfort Cards Meditation for Loss by CuddleBuddys. And so this is the cards that I have been picking from and reading from. I really love these. They're created by mental health professionals, social workers, licensed social workers. I saw there was an empath coach in here. So these are really, really good. I got these from Amazon. So we have been pulling from these. Today I pulled 2 cards. And I actually shuffled them. And one of the cards came out twice. So I was like, we're just going to have to keep it. So the first one says, grieving is a highly individual experience, and this is by Kelsey Gordon, MSW, LSWAIC. So they show the credentials, which I really like that. So grieving is a highly individual experience. The second card is Make Time Daily to Grieve. Linda Morton, LMSW, ACSW. I love that they put their credentials in here, and that's really dope, because as a social worker we just need more people. We need more credentials, so that's exciting for me. A little geek moment. All right, so the first card, grieving is a highly individual experience. This definitely resonates with me because it is an individual experience. Like, there isn't a world map or a grief map or anything to tell you how to grieve and what your grief experience will look like. It is really individual. We can have all the resources, we can have everything in place, and your grief experience will still look completely different. This is why education and awareness is so important for me and to teach it, because I can give you 1,000 resources and it will still look different. So it's important for me to know what is grief, what does it look like, what are the possibilities, and to realize like just the holistic effect it has on our bodies. It is an individual experience. No one person has the same grief experience. Now, we might have similarities, or we might truly understand like if you've lost a parent, like there is a certain understanding that we all have with one another. If you lost a child, there is an understanding that you all have. However, not one journey looks the same. So grieving is a highly individual experience, and that definitely resonates with me, and it definitely makes sense because we talk about it and we basically make people aware of that, because it's really hard to understand grief first of all, but then like to add on this other layer of like, dang, like, so there's not a handbook to tell us how to grieve, like there's not 12 ways to grieve, and it really isn't. The second card is make time daily to grieve. This is so important to me because at Healing She Got Faith, we talk about grief beyond death. We talk about physical death, which leads to grief. We talk about so much. And for me, I have been on this journey with myself, as well as encouraging people who want to know, to give yourself permission to grieve. You have to give yourself that permission, and like to make it a daily like responsibility to feel grief. One, it takes a lot of discipline, and two, it takes for you to be brave enough to sit with yourself. And it's something that I wish more of us did in this world. Like I wish more of us actually sat with ourselves and allowed ourselves to grieve. So many of us would be so far in our healing journey, and so many of us would feel so much better if we just had that permission to give ourselves to grieve and to feel everything that we want to feel. It's hard, guys. Don't get me wrong. It is extremely hard. It's not the easiest thing to do, and it's not the most fun thing to do. I talk about all the time how like the reason I am the way I am is because I sat in agonizing pain. I sat in my pain. I had to feel in order to heal. And I know like that can sound real cliche, but I went through some hard times in my grief, and the only way I was able to defeat that is if I acknowledge my grief, and that came with permission to grieve. So I love that this card says make daily time to grieve, because that's exactly what we need. And I hope that if you're somebody who has chronic grief, I hope that you're able to give yourself that permission. If you're someone who just experienced some type of loss that you are grieving, whether it's a breakup, a miscarriage, a pet loss, a lover, a friendship, a job transfer, a home transition, I hope that day in and day out you allow yourself to grieve, because you are experiencing real feelings, and I want you to know that that's valid. So, I love these cards. They definitely resonated with me, and I can go on and on about it, but let's go ahead and jump into our topic of the day, which is National Children's Grief Awareness. I will see you over there. Welcome to the topic segment of the Healing She Got Faith talk show. In this portion of the episode, we discuss the topic of the day, which is the title of this episode. So we really pride ourselves on talking about grief, healing, being present, and just having an opportunity to be safe enough to be who you are. I hope in this episode you're able to take it with you, and I hope you're able to give yourself permission to heal the way you need to heal. We love you, but as always, love you the way you love the world. Enjoy the topic. Happy Monday and welcome to 127. We are jumping into one of my favorite topics, which is grief. But then we had to add on children's grief, which I think is so important because, and I talked about this in the last episode, that it is so important that we have resources for children, because children need it. And when I say children, I do mean up to 18, and really I do mean up to 25, because our young adults do not have their frontal lobe, and they still are very childlike. Like, just because you turn a certain age does not make you an adult. Anyways, that's another soap opera for another day. But when I created Healing She Got Faith, I specifically made it for adults, because there is a lack of resources for our young adults up to our adults when it comes to resources. Excuse me. A lot of times we want to provide resources for children, but then we forget that like the adults in the children's life also need resources. So that's caregivers, that's parents, that's grandparents, that's any adult that supports that child. That's also our teachers, our counselors, our social workers. That's really anybody who are helping children. Like we can't just like provide all these resources for the children and not the adults, which is where I came in with my organization, Healing She Got Faith, because there was just a lack of, not saying that it didn't exist, there was just a lack of. Now I will say, ever since I have started my business in 2020 and ever since COVID, I have seen an increase in grief organizations, grief pages on Instagram and things like that. Like, and even celebrities. Like I see more celebrities talking about grief. I see more books about grief. I even see like celebrities naming like their comedy specials after grief. Like I see more of it. I don't know if it's because there actually is more of it, or if that's because like I'm now officially like involved in the industry, so I tend to see it. You know how they say like you never see your car until you buy it or until you focus on it, things like that. So maybe that's what I'm going through, but I will say I do see more of it. So November 21st, 2024 is National Children's Grief Awareness. So I'm going to read you from childrensgriefawarenessday.com. I actually use this website every year. I have on the shirt. I actually bought like 2 shirts from them previous, but I think I lost the shirts. I don't know. But every year, like I buy a t-shirt from them and I wear it on the day of. So, yeah. So anyways, National Children's Grief Awareness was created in 2008 by Highmark Caring Place, a center for grieving children, adolescents, and their families, and since recognized by organizations around the world. Children's Grief Awareness is observed every year on the 3rd Thursday in November, the Thursday before the U.S. holiday of Thanksgiving. This time of the year is particularly appropriate time to support grieving children because the holiday season is often an especially difficult time after death. Yes, because that's why I created Grief Healing and Holidays. This is what we call the grief season. Well, I call it the grief season, which is essentially the holiday season. Like we see an influx in grief. We see an influx in people missing their loved ones. We see this. And so I love that they created this day a week before Thanksgiving because that goes right along with grief, healing, and holidays. So why is National Children's Grief Awareness important? Just like grief in general, we need awareness. For children, it is important for adults in society to understand grief so that we can collectively come together to show support and understanding for our youth. It is important that we have resources for the whole family, the whole community, the whole society, right? I love that we have a day dedicated specifically to children awareness because sometimes as an adult, we have this expectation of children to function the way we do. We expect a 13-year-old to understand how to control their emotions when as adults, sometimes we do not. Like there's a 13-year-old who lost their mother and is probably at school fighting. And as adults in their life, we are expecting that child to understand how to control their emotions. But that 13-year-old just lost their mother or lost their mother 4 years ago. If you are 25 and you lost your mother or father at 5, that still affects you to this day. So as adults, we have to know, 1, about grief, and 2, we have to have an understanding. Now, I'm not saying that because they're grieving, they should be able to go around and punch people. But what I'm saying is if we understand grief and we understand that a certain time of the year, people tend to act different, then we can be prepared to support those children, those adolescents, those young adults ourselves, right? Because we now understand that our body keeps score. If you haven't read that book, please read that book. We now understand that our natural biological clocks remember the time of grief, right? So when we start to understand that, we're able to better prepare. Now, I'm not saying it's going to stop the fight, but it could or it could not. And also too, we could provide a space for our children to be able to say, I miss blah, 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 because we're also providing ourselves that space because we are collectively understanding the awareness around grief. So, as I stated before, I spoke on last week's episode how I purposely focus on adults who are grieving, because if we want the kids to be safe, then the adults also need the resource, right? So we also need resources, right? Which is why when I first started Grieving the Holidays, it was a 6-week grief group that started in October and went all the way to January. I said 6 weeks, but that's longer than 6 weeks. So I would have to look at the dates, because I don't think it was always that long. I actually think I started in November and it went to December, now that I'm saying that out loud. Regardless, I purposely chose a grief group that met on the holidays and met through the holiday season for 6 weeks to give people that safe and brave space to be able to grieve. And specifically, it was for adults, because adults needed it. We tend to make ourselves busy and we tend to work and work and work to not feel the pain, which ends up isolating us, and we become so angry. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced, like, you're just super irritated, you're angry, you're not the nicest person to be around. A lot of times that is because we have not given ourselves space to grieve. So in that, it is important that we give ourselves that permission and that space to be able to grieve and to be able to understand grief. Also, too, as an adult, know and understand that you may not know how you will react in grief. You may not know how your child will react in grief. You may be a teacher going to school on the holidays and you're like, man, all these kids keep fighting, but you don't necessarily know what children are going through, as well as you don't know what adults are going through. So we don't know what these children are seeing. We don't know what they're experiencing. There's so much that goes into that. We really just don't know. But if we can be aware and understand grief, that does make a world of difference. So now what I want to do is I want to look at some statistics. And again, I'll have all this in the show notes and I'll have the websites and things like that. So this is from childrensgriefawareness.com. It says, before they graduate from high school, 1 child out of every 20 children will have a parent die. And that number doesn't include those who experience the death of a brother, sister, close grandparent, aunt, uncle, or friend. I was a child who lost their parent. I lost my dad at 15. So that's very telling. So 1 out of 20 children will experience a parent death. So this statistic does not include any other caregiver or friend. I just spoke at a school of over 100 9th through 11th graders who just lost a student. The day I'm recording this, I'm actually going to speak to another group of students who just lost a fellow student who died by suicide. So I'm curious to see the statistics on things like that, like students dying, like, and how does that affect the grief of other students. Okay, this one is by experiencecamps.org. It says, according to the Childhood Bereavement Estimation Model, CBEM, about 6.99% of children in the United States, or nearly 5 million children, will experience the death of a parent or sibling by the age of 18. This number more than doubles to almost 12.9 million youth under 25. So that number takes a big hike. So what we're seeing is that before the age of 18, there is a high percentage of kids who will experience a death of a parent. Then it jumps to, I don't even know, that's over half, triple. But then we see that number jump to people under 25. So up until 18, we see 1 in 20 children will experience a parent death. And then up until 25, the age of 25, we see that 12.9 million youth will experience a parental death, which is, that's a lot. That's a lot. Okay. Let's look at rates of childhood grief. This is also from experiencecamps.org. It says approximately 6.3 million U.S. children will experience the death of a parent or sibling by the time they are 18. 1 in 12 U.S. children will experience the death of a parent or, oh, that's the same thing. 1 in 12, yeah, will experience the death of a parent or sibling by age 18. In 2022, 1,089 kids in the U.S. were newly bereaved each day. So in 2022, we had 1,089 kids every day who had some type of bereavement. The need to talk about grief. 54% of people struggle to find grief resources. Again, that's a lot, and that's one of the reasons why Healing She Got Faith even exists. Because 54%, I don't know 54% of who. Like, I don't know if that's of the United States. I don't know, I don't know that specific part. But regardless, that's a lot. It says 57% of those who lost a parent during childhood report that the support from family and friends waned within 3 months, although it took an average of 6 years to move forward. This is something that I often talk about, right? Because the first year is typically the easiest because you do have support. But this statistic is saying within 3 months, there was a loss of resources from family and loved ones. That's 57% of people who experience, after 3 months of a death, the family and friends slow down. That's a lot. Okay, COVID-19 and grief. Over 1.2 million people in the United States died from COVID-19. COVID-19 related deaths of relatives who represent key sources of social support and fundamentally alter youth's economic security and in turn the success and timing of their transition to adulthood. So COVID-19 caused a lot of grief for a lot of us, especially our children. One thing I talk about with COVID-19 and our children also too is that our children grieved the experience they would have had in school. So if you can imagine going to school one day, like, and you're 10, 5, 6, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? You are raised that you go to school every day. You see your friends, you see your teachers, you have your desk, you have your routine, And when COVID-19 happened, we said, just kidding, now you guys are gonna be at home and you're gonna learn through a computer. So our children were grieving their teachers, they're grieving their students, their friends, they're grieving their routine. Nobody, to my knowledge and to what I experienced, really took into consideration what our children were going through. Our children were grieving a whole experience that their whole life they had been told this is mandatory. And to me, I feel like as a society, we failed our children. Like, this was the time in the United States that the education system really could have been like, we got this, we about to show y'all what we can do. And we completely failed. And I'm not blaming the teachers. I'm not blaming the social workers or counselors. I'm blaming the systematic school system and education system within the United States of America. Potential impacts of childhood bereavement. Childhood grief is associated with developmental disruptions, including relationship, academic, and career functioning, substance abuse, mental health challenges, including depression and suicide, and poverty. That's really deep, and that's something that we don't necessarily talk about, but there are developmental disruptions, and we see that in adults as well. We see that when adults experience grief, we see the shift in their holistic health. Death has an intergenerational impact. Among adults who lost a parent when they were growing up, 79% said that when they became a parent, they missed having the guidance of the parent who died. 80% said the experience was the hardest thing they ever had to face. Of course, because we all grow up and we want to have our children, we want to have our house, we want to have this, and we want our parents to be there. One thing I always say about myself is, like, if I ever have the opportunity to get married and have kids, I pray that I can marry a man who can give my children grandparents, because I won't have that. And I also pray that I marry a man who his parents also love me, because I will never be able to give my spouse or my children grandparents because they died so young. I didn't have grandparents growing up either. So in my hopes of having a husband and having children, I hope that I'm able to marry into a family that, one, the parents love me like their own, and two, they give they give my children grandparents, because we need it. And I need guidance too. Like, living this life without my parents is extremely hard. And so if I do ever have the opportunity to have children and have a husband, I want that. So that is one of my biggest prayers. A report by New York Life Foundation and American Federation of Teachers found that students who have lost a parent or guardian typically exhibit Difficulty concentrating in class. This is observed by 87% of teachers. Withdrawal or disengagement and less class participation. This was observed by 82% of teachers. And then absences. This is observed by 72% of teachers. Decrease in quality of work, observed by 68% of teachers. And less reliability in turning in assignments, observed by 66%. When I'm reading all of this, what I'm seeing is that we see a decline in our children who are experiencing grief, specifically from parents. So this to me means that we need to put more resources into children who have lost a parent. We need to support foster families. We need to support relatives who took in their loved one, relatives who took in the children who lost a parent. We need to have more support, right? Also, too, we might need to change the educational system for our bereaved children. If they're not turning in assignments, if they're being absent, if they're disengaged, there has to be a systematic change to assist. Sometimes we really do have to meet people where they're at. As an adult, if we lose a parent, we're not going to go to work for some time. If we lose a spouse, we're going to be affected. There are certain things that we have to do in order to adjust how we do things. So there has to be systematic changes. When I'm reading this, it's not the teacher's fault, because we already have lack of resources for our teachers within the educational system. And then you want us to add on grief stuff. I always say schools do not function as an educational institution now. They actually function as a mental health institution, because most of our children and teachers and staff and faculty are dealing with mental health issues. We are no longer focused on the educational aspect, because it's hard to focus on the educational aspect when you're having to deal with death, homelessness, poverty, when you're having to deal with other things. I can't expect a child to learn how to read if they're hungry. I can't expect a child to be engaged if their mom just died yesterday, because that's another thing. Sometimes, I'll never forget this story. And I don't remember if I read it on Reddit, TikTok, social media, but there was a child who just watched their mother die and went to school. And when the teacher the teacher was like, "Why you late?" And the teacher was like, "Well, I just watched my mom die." And the teacher was like, "Oh my gosh, why are you here?" And the student was like, "Because this is the only place I feel safe, and I didn't want to be by myself." I can't expect that child to function. When I found out my dad had a heart attack and died, I was at school. It was during MAP testing. That's the Missouri Assessment. I don't forget what P stands for, but it was the Missouri Assessment Test. It was MAP testing, which if you live in Missouri, you know this. Like, there's a big chunk of the school year that is focused on MAP testing. And I found out at school that my dad had died. And I was told at school that he died. I was told at school that he had a heart attack. I was told that he didn't make it. So that day and for the rest of that week, there was no function of me. Even when I came back to school after being out for I think it was 7 days, I wasn't the same person. It was hard. I was also 15. A big chunk of my life had just got taken away from me. And so there was a teacher, though, I'll never forget. She gave me a C, because she said I missed 7 days of school and I didn't have assignments. And I was like, lady, I had just lost. I went from an A to a C, and she was like, yeah, there's nothing I can do because you missed all that school. That was ridiculous, because again, we have to switch the education system of, we do have, unless we put in, like other cultures do, we put in ceremonies and systems to celebrate and to acknowledge grief. In America, we just don't do that, at least not in the school system. That's not to say everybody doesn't do them, but in the public education system, we just don't have things in place to allow people to grieve and to experience death. We have such a weird relationship with death in the United States of America, especially when it comes to public schools. And so, there has to be some adjustment. So, yeah, kind of got emotional talking about that. So, as somebody who was a child who experienced grief, one thing I always talk about is that I feel like the adults in my life didn't really know how to handle it, and I felt like I had to be strong. There was only one adult in my life at the time who told me I did not have to be strong. I had just experienced a major loss, and you know, there was no guideline to say like, okay, you gotta do X, Y, and Z. But the other adults in my life, I felt like they just would not talk about the death. Like, I really didn't get over my dad's death until 11 years later my mom got killed. And so I just wish at the age of 15 there was more resources. And granted, when I was 15, which was like in 2007, mental health was not being talked about a lot. I mean, I thank God for my dad, because like my dad was going to therapy. He was taking me to therapy. He was taking me and my brother to therapy. Him and my mom are going through a divorce, and so he was in like therapy for divorced people, kids experiencing divorce. Like, thank God my dad had the mental health bug, and I don't even know that at that time that he was alive he even realized, like, Dad, like, you're years beyond what this society is experiencing. Because I think for my dad, he was kind of embarrassed to be going to therapy, but he was very open about talking about it, which I'm so thankful. And I wish he was alive today so that I could say, like, you were light years above your time, sweetie. Like, you were doing so much more than other people, and now mental health has become such a topic, and I just wish he was alive to be able to experience that. So there is another day that deals with grief. It's called National Grief Day, which is observed August 31st or August 30th. I think it's August 30th. So National Grief Awareness Day, observed annually on August 30th, is a day dedicated to raising awareness about the grieving process, offering support to those who are grieving, and educating others on how to help those in mourning. I just found this out this year, and I don't know if you guys have been a continuing listener, you know that like at the beginning of October, I like went through all the observances in October, and like every month you can go on Google and just literally just type in December days of observance and holidays. So I did that in October because October has a lot of days. But as I was doing that, I actually came across National Grief Day. So I wish I would have known about that years ago, because I would have been celebrating it. Because I actually didn't know about that, but I knew about National Grief Awareness Day for children, which was really cool. So it's cool to see that we actually have a National Grief Day that is observed. So a couple dates to keep in mind: August 30th, that's National Grief Day, and then the third Thursday of every November is National Children's Grief Awareness Day, which I think is really cool. And so what you do is you wear blue, or you can go to what's this website called? Let me look it up. Children's Grief Awareness Day, and you can order a t-shirt like I do every year, and you wear it in honor. So you wear blue in honor of National Grief Awareness Day. If you didn't know, the black ribbon, like if you've ever seen the breast cancer ribbon and different things like that. So grief ribbon is a black ribbon, which is really cool if you want to, fun facts. All in all, it is important we know and understand grief. We all need support. It takes a lot to overcome grief. There are things we can do to support people who are grieving, and educate people who do not understand grief. And so all in all, we just need to become a society that is equipped to understanding grief and to really understand what exactly we are going through. When I got into my profession, some of the things I used to do with some of my clients who dealt with grief, like I had a 6th grader who found his 5th grade sister, or it might have been opposite. Maybe he was in the 5th grade, and he found his sister who was in the 6th grade. She was in the bathroom or in her room, and she had died, and he found her. And the school that I was working with at the time, we worked with a family for a long time, up until that young man went on to middle school. But some of the things we did was, the family couldn't afford a tombstone, so like what we did is we made little windmills out of like straws and paper. There's an activity I do that it's called the Spotlight on You. I talked about it in the last episode 126, and it's basically you write a piece of paper You have a piece of paper, you can split it up into different sections. You can write what you thought grief was, what grief actually is, shine a spotlight on yourself for whatever reason you want, and then shine a spotlight on the person, place, or thing you are grieving. So you can do different activities. You can also celebrate. So like instead of mourning on the death day, you can actually celebrate. Like some of the things I've done is I went to Paris and wore my mom's favorite color and wore some of her clothes and just experienced some of the things she likes, such as mimosas and coconut ice cream. For my dad, on his birthday and on his death day, I tend to go to coffee shops and just like have a cup of coffee in his remembrance. I have a memorial wall at my community center. And so there are different things you can do. If you're comfortable with it, if your loved one has passed and it's their birthday, buy them a birthday cake. Go to a grief group, start a grief group, join a grief group, maybe do celebration with your family. There are different things that you can do. Maybe draw a picture. Maybe remember some of the activities they like to do when you participate in the activities. Maybe go to a spot, one of the last spots you all ever went to. I remember when my dad died, we used to go to Einstein Bagels in the Central West End in St. Louis, Missouri, and there was always this parking spot that we always went to. And so maybe a year and a half after he died, I went with a friend, and like me and the friend just like went to that parking spot, and I just was like, he always took me here after school, and I just cried in my friend's arms. So different things like that. Don't be scared to switch up traditions. Like the first year after my mom died, I had spent so much time with people that like that New Year's I actually spent by myself, which was so out of the ordinary for me because I love New Year's and I'm always surrounded by people. But that year I was like, I'm surrounded by people all year round. I just do not want to bring in the new year with new people or people at all. I just want to be by myself, and I honored myself in that. So I think a couple things for today: honor yourself when it comes to grief. Make sure you have and you are a safe space for yourself and for children. If you have children in your life who are grieving, just provide that space. Make yourself comfortable with grief. So, some of the simple things that you can do to be comfortable with grief is literally like get in a circle with people who are grieving and just yell grief. Like literally, it might sound silly, but like when I was becoming a social worker, one of my teachers used to make me do that. Like we would get in a circle and be like suicide, like just to get comfortable saying it. So like sometimes I do that with people who want to learn about grief. Like say it over and over: grief, 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 grieving, grief, 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 grieving. Be able to say that so you become comfortable. Be comfortable in your grief. Give yourself that permission to grieve. So there's a couple different things. Some of the stuff I say might sound silly, but I promise you I'm only saying it because I experienced it and because I've had to do it myself. So I think, again, we just need to become comfortable with grief. We need to provide resources for everybody. We need to acknowledge. The adults have to be confident and not strong enough, but like confident and aware enough to know about grief so that we can support our children in grief. So I'm going to end on that note. So I love you all. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for coming. I love you, but love you the way you love the world. And we'll end on our affirmation. All right, so you are now about to hear our affirmation. I want to give you an affirmation to carry for the week. So from Monday to Monday, you at least have an affirmation that you are repeating to yourself every day. She got faith. Listen, we want to give you affirmation to get through the week. So enjoy. Episode 127's affirmation. So today's affirmation is: I know that I am not the only one in the world who is experiencing grief, and at least in that I know I am not alone. Oh, I love that so much, because if we all are experiencing grief, then at least in that we know we are not alone. And I actually, if you've ever seen, I think it's called P.S. I Love You, that's part of a quote from P.S. I Love You. Like, they say something like, if we all feel alone, then at least in that we know we're not alone. And I think that's just absolutely beautiful. So again, I know that I am not the only one in the world who is experiencing grief, and at least in that I know I'm not alone. You're not alone. grief is real. Grief is part of the very human experience. And so I want you to know that you are heard, you are seen, you are valid, and you are not alone. I love you, but love you the way you love the world, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye, guys. All right, we have came to the end of our show. I really appreciate you for listening and sticking with us and coming every Monday at 3 p.m. Central to hang out with us. I appreciate you guys. I can't thank you enough to my listeners, followers, everybody, friends, family who loves and believes in everything that I'm doing. I really, really thank you from the bottom of my heart. I love you, but I always want you to remember to love you the way you love the world, and I'll catch you next Monday. Bye, guys.